as a leader, how you show up is as important as if you show up. So am I showing up in a way that gives people energy, that's inspirational? Am I focused? Am I ready to review their work? And I want to be fully present. I want to be alert. I want to be refreshed and ready to engage with them. And so I started to look at things that I was doing in my own life and things that I wasn't doing.
Welcome to TTalks, where we dive into the stories behind the leaders shaping our world. I'm your host, Walia. Today, we're joined by the remarkable Allison West Hughes, an established leader with a vast experience in global, regional, and government IT solutions and service sales, always focusing on delivering superior business outcomes for customers. As the Corporate Vice President of Digital Acquisition at Microsoft, Allison leads the company's digital sales strategy and revenue contributions. Her global team is dedicated to scaling solutions through connected sales and marketing and driving digital innovation supported by a world-class Salesforce and partner ecosystem. Before joining Microsoft in 2022, Allison served as Vice President of Digital Go-to-Market and Enterprise Sales at ServiceNow, where she led the digital transformation efforts for the most strategic customers. Her career also includes impactful roles at VMware, Cisco Systems, and Logicalis US. Allison is passionate about STEM activities, diversity, and inclusion. She's a founding board member of the Western School of Science and Technology and has won awards for the dedication to diversity and inclusion. Allison, welcome to TTalks.
Hey, TJ. Hey, thanks for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure, Allison. I've kind of touched on, some of the things you've accomplished that we've highlighted. That's probably a fraction of what you've gone through. I'd love to understand your journey in a little bit more detail, especially that pivotal point that got you to where you are today in this realm of leadership, guiding others, coaching others, all of that. How did that journey really transpire? How did you get here, Allison? I'd love to understand that a little bit more, please.
Sure. I was working at Cisco Systems at the time, having an amazing career as a specialist and as an account manager, and became really curious about leading a team. And at that time, the first line manager role was called a regional manager. And so I was really interested in becoming a leader. I wanted to get closer to strategy. I loved developing people and putting together a plan for my particular product and area of expertise, which was unified communications. I sold a lot of phones and phone systems in my day, TJ. And so I applied to be a regional manager at Cisco and had the opportunity to lead this amazing team for 4+ years. And I got a lot of energy. And I realized over the course of that first leadership job that I was better at leading than I was as an individual contributor. I was a great individual contributor, but I felt like, gosh, I think I can really do something with this aspect of my career, which is leading others and inspiring others to achieve more. And so I think that first leadership career was really the pivot point for me in continuing forward and advancing and taking on more responsibility as a leader over the course of, what would be the 15 years following that.
Amazing. And I love what you said there. Like you sold a lot of phones, you sold a lot of devices there.
A lot.
That takes a lot of different skills for per se, and communication becomes one of them as well. But to take that, go into a leadership role and now coaching others, usually what we find in a lot of organizations is they promote the wrong lead or wrong individuals to leadership. And they might be great sellers, but not necessarily great leaders from that perspective. And you went in and said, okay, I've done well there. Now that I became a people leader and started coaching and guiding others, I became even better and realized this is what I'm naturally even better at.
That's right.
Yeah. So help me understand that decision-making there in terms of, hey, is this something I want to go? You putting that bet on yourself. It's a new realm. You're already doing something really well. How do you go extend yourself into something else and then say, hey, you know what, I like this even more? But just that decision-making that took you there.
Yeah. As a collaboration specialist, I had to put together a strategy as how I was going to achieve my number. And I covered multiple teams in different verticals. So I had a public sector team, I had an enterprise team. And so I broke it down into individual components. I had a demand generation component. I had a development component for the account managers that I supported. And then I had some executive sponsorship that I sought out. And the piece that really resonated with me was the development of others and putting together a curriculum that made it so that the account managers could sell without me in the room and felt comfortable and confident. And so that really got me inspired to be a leader. And at the time, there weren't a lot of female leaders at Cisco, not in the regional manager space. I think in public sector at the time, it was me and one other woman. And I had a massive team as a new leader. I think I had 13 account managers spread out over 4 states. And so it was a great opportunity for me to learn. And I think one of the first things that I noticed was like each of these people on my team, they're all individuals. They were all motivated by different aspects of covering their territories and being successful. And so I had to really understand them as individuals and be prepared to modify the way that I coached or the way that I led them to be customized to the individual that I was coaching.
Very cool. Very cool. There's factors of that you've touched on, that there's studies now that are showing that we need to be focusing and helping promote individuals, not necessarily as blanket statements that go out and say, here's our policy and this is what we do. You were already tuned into that. And it sounds like that's what helped you kind of move to the next level as well. You also touched on being a female leader, right? And not being enough of them out there. And still, it's a challenge that we have today as well. What would that look like? And what did that look like for you in terms of bypassing or breaking that barrier to say, hey, you know what, I can also do this? Because when you're not seeing a lot of role models or individuals in that space, a lot of people don't think that this is the space for me. So breaking that barrier, what did that look like for you, Allison?
I should be candid and tell you I had to interview for the job more than once. And that would be something that continued on in my career. So as a high potential person looking to advance in my career, I went through the interview process and I got my feedback. And the feedback was that I needed to improve in a couple of areas. So I waited until another role came up and interviewed again. And I'm forever grateful for the operations director that gave me the opportunity to show that I could be a leader. And so that pattern kind of followed me throughout my career. And I became more comfortable with putting myself out there in a way that was uncomfortable, being willing to get the feedback, and understanding that if I didn't get that job, that was the beginning of my opportunity to be seen in that light, and that eventually I would. And that pattern really followed me throughout my career and throughout my advancement opportunities. And I don't know if that's because I was a woman or if it was because of some unique aspect of my experience that I brought to those leadership roles, but I got more comfortable over time with that setback and continue forward. And I think that really differentiates me and the way that I've approached my career and the opportunities that have been presented in my career.
That's quite interesting. Something similar that happened to me in my career as well. It was constantly knocking on doors, right? Not giving up and saying, hey, listen, just because I've been turned down for something doesn't mean that it's the end of the road. You can keep going back at it. You can keep going back at it. And I remember when I took over the IoT business in Canada for Microsoft, one of the things that the hiring manager or the director at the time said to me was that he goes, you've been persistent. Like you've been annoying me for the last, 2 years to really focus on this. I think you really want this role. So I think there's that aspect of it. And your feedback or advice to other leaders who are putting that trust in the person they're bringing in. Because that's usually the biggest risk that they have is if I hire this person and everything goes south, what happens? Or are they going to be able to do the job? Or do they have the skills and capabilities? I personally look at it and say, we shouldn't judge people based on what their past was. It's what their potential is, because people can change instantly. What are your thoughts on that, Allison, being a leader now and having to put that trust in a lot of individuals and folks every day?
I think one of the things that it sounds like you've accomplished really successfully is when you raise your hand and say that you're interested in more, what happens is the time frame for the decision by that leader, that hiring manager, is extended. So now they have an opportunity to get to know TJ, not just through an interview process, but over the course of maybe a year or 2 years. And they know that you have interest in doing more and they're able to work with you on what that looks like. And I think that's, it really helps both the hiring manager as well as the candidate to understand, is this the right opportunity? Is now the time to give TJ the opportunity to do that IoT job? And so I think that is a really important process. You just show up for the interview process, puts a lot of pressure on the hiring manager and a lot of pressure on the candidate. both have to make sure that it's a great opportunity in a series of very structured conversations. And so specifically looking back on that regional manager role, I had shadowed other regional managers. I had spent time in their business, really understood their different styles. So it gave the hiring manager and me the chance to know, like, hey, this is something it really appeals to me. And it's something that I have conviction that I want to do for a long period of time.
That's great. Great perspective there, Allison, because a lot of people look at it and say, well, I applied for the role and I never heard back, or I applied for this role and I'm not getting anything from them and they're not interested. It's like, what effort have we put in to really let the team know, especially internal? External becomes a little different in that aspect, but for internal roles, what effort are we putting in, right? So how are we extending ourselves? How are we getting recognized? How are we getting known? And more importantly, how are we doing things for other teams or our team without expecting something in return? I think that's where leadership comes in, is that you're constantly doing things for others without expecting to get something back immediately. You're trying to enable others. And we have those all the time where someone comes in and says, hey, I just need some advice, or I need some guidance, or anything like that. And it's not like it's a two-way exchange. It's like, yeah, you know what? Have you considered this? And then you're back on your track and doing things. So I think those leadership traits that you're talking about definitely have to start from the individual rather than them waiting to get a title that says now they're a leader or in a leadership type of role to get that classification, if you will.
Yeah, and understand that any leader has an obligation to have a pool of talent that they see for future opportunities. And so it's not an imposition to ask to be a part of that. And it actually helps the leader because we are obligated to succession planning. We need to know who's out there, who's ready, what do they need to develop. All of that is the fundamental job of leading a team. It's not extra work. That is the work of being a leader, is having that talent bench ready, people that you know that are in the market, that are ready to add value and drive impact for the team. That's part of our job.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant how you've said that. And I think that's going to tie into, I guess, the next aspect of one of my questions is mentorship, right? Because there's a lot of visibility that we need to have in terms of what you're speaking about, but that also could indirectly tie into mentorship as well. What are your thoughts on mentorship, and what kind of role has that played in your career and in the careers of the individuals you're leading?
So I think mentorship is, it's a big topic. I feel like when you walk up to somebody and you say, hey, TJ, I really want you to be my mentor, I think it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And so I've stopped using that word because what I find is the mentor feels overwhelmed and is like, what are TJ's expectations of the time commitment? I need to know that before I say yes, because if I do this, I want to have high integrity about it. And what are TJ's expectations of the outcome? So you can have all that. You can break down that conversation. But what has worked for me, and this is advice I got around that same time working for Cisco, was to develop a board of directors with different expertise. And so I have a group of people around me that I can ask questions that I feel like are really differentiated in their skill set. And I have acquired those relationships with people over time. And so I can drop a text message or pick up the phone or meet somebody for a cup of coffee if I feel like I've got a problem or an opportunity that they're uniquely suited to advise me on. And that is way more comfortable as a mentor to be able to just kind of have this ongoing dialogue where, hey, Allison's going to reach out to me if she's got a crossroads in her career, and I'm going to give her great candid advice. A gentleman who's served that role for me is the former COO of Cisco, Gary Moore. I can ask him a really direct question about an opportunity. Is this the right one? He knows me well. He knows the market well. But he might not be the same individual that I might ask a different type of question that comes up over the course of my career. So I'd encourage people to develop a lot of different relationships rather than focusing on one individual that can advance their career. Additionally, I think there's value in building out the differentiation between mentors, allies, and sponsors. Mentors, you ask a question, they're giving you advice. Allies are your deepest, your relationships you built along the way that might pick you up when you're down. And sponsors are the ones that are going to say, have you considered Allison for this role when you're not in the room? And those are three really different things. And I think they kind of all get muddied together into one capacity, which is mentorship.
Very interesting. And I know you talked about, you don't like using that word mentorship or mentor anywhere. Is it a word that you replaced that with, or is it, again, the three verticals that you kind of touched on?
Yeah, I just look at it as relationships I'm going to cultivate and put my energy into cultivating and maintaining those relationships so that I have access to them when I need them. When a challenge or an opportunity comes up that I feel like, hey, that's a great question for me to ask Gary. I'm going to go and I'm going to book some time with Gary and we're going to talk through this. I think that by definition, he's mentoring me. But I think when people have really weighty operating jobs, which he's exited out of he's in an advisory capacity, so he has more time and energy. But when people have really weighty operating jobs, they get a lot of people who ask questions like that. And it's hard to calibrate, like, okay, how many people do I want to mentor over the course of the quarter? And does this individual, are they the right fit in seniority for me to mentor? Would somebody else with more recency as to their lived experience be the right fit? But TJ, if you call me and say, there's something I want to bounce off of you, it reminds me of something that you said on the podcast, sure, no problem. I know I can answer that question for you. I'll do it with as much candor and care as I can. But the dynamic of maintaining enough cycles to be sure that you're available as a mentor is really challenging.
Absolutely. And I think the whole concept of mentorship, the way you're kind of talking about it almost seems like an obligation or a burden. And it almost is like, as a leader, is like, if I cannot deliver, what does that mean? And what are the consequences? Versus it's a friendly conversation. Like that's kind of how you're putting it. Hey, listen, Allison, can I bounce something off of you? What are your thoughts? And you might come back and say, not my domain, not my expertise.
Yeah, you should talk to somebody else. Like here's somebody who's so good at that I have in my network. And somebody who changed my thinking about this, TJ, was when I worked at ServiceNow, the first CEO I worked for was John Donahoe. He's now the CEO of Nike. And he has a talk that he's given at Stanford Business that's available on YouTube. And he said that when he started his career, he thought he'd find a mentor. He'd kneel at that person's feet, and all of the knowledge that he needed to be successful, he would get from this one individual. And then he said over time, what he learned was he was going to learn a little bit from a lot of people, not a lot from one person. And I think that also changes the dynamic of the way that you interact with people on your team and around you to think, what can I learn from that person? What are they good at? What do they have expertise or capability in that I might not understand as deeply? And I think that's a really healthy refresh around the people that you work with on a day-to-day basis.
Very cool. Very sound advice there. I know one of the things you talk about the board of directors and setting and formalizing that up as well. When does one do that? There's a lot of individuals that are individual contributors, and they necessarily may not see the same perspective of what these relationships are. I would say they would still have some of these individuals, but they're not labeling or categorizing them as such. Yeah. I personally do it, and I've done it for a very long time, where depending on the aspect of the business, after leaving Microsoft, running my business, I knew the individuals I needed to go to for certain advice, whether it's for strategizing, whether it's for how do you price your products, et cetera, in the real world. Very different conversations. When does someone start that from your perspective as an individual contributor, or when they're on their journey to that leadership role, or at any given point at all?
I think both. And I should add on that it's really hard to mentor or coach somebody if they don't know where they're going or what they want. So backing up a second, I think the most important thing you can do as an individual contributor or as a leader is have a true North Star vision for where you're going, where you want to go. Big, hairy, audacious goal. I wanted to be chief revenue officer, and that changed a lot of conversations that I had with the people around me. And it was easier for them to say, take this job, not that job. If that is your goal, then you need to build out these capabilities. And this opportunity gives you access to those competencies that you don't yet have. And so I think that's step one, figuring out where you want to go. You can change it. You can change it every year. You should probably change it about every 3 years, not every year. If you're changing it every year, then you might not have the right goal identified. But what happens is you start to build out mid-level and near-term goals that align to that. And then that allows you to have really constructive conversations with people. Like if you're in a sales capacity, one of your near-term goals, has to be performance related, right? Like nobody's going to promote you if you don't have incredible performance and the opportunity that you've been given. So that's always in my near-term goals, is to make sure that I'm executing on the opportunity I've been given. But then in the mid-time horizon and the long-term goals, really helps facilitate a more constructive conversation with those individuals to say, this is where I'm trying to go. And then your near-term board of directors as an individual contributor might be like your HR business partner, your talent acquisition, any matrix organizations that you're supported by, right? Like so some of those specialist organizations, all of those people are working with you every day and can see you performing and in the job and give you great advice. So don't overlook the obvious either, right? Like, so you're searching for these, dignitary people with incredible resumes. You're surrounded by people who spend, 40 or 50 hours a week with you. They're right there with you. And a lot of them have roles that are designed to make you successful and give you feedback. So there probably exist already today as a board of directors type of capacity for you. And then you can just add to it over time. You add some new people that you meet along the way, and you figure out that they have some capabilities that are really of interest to you. So you just kind of add to it over time.
Yeah, no, you reminded me of something very important. When I first started at Microsoft in 2010, I actually was paired up with a new hire buddy, and he was also new. And, not a new hire buddy, but a roommate when we went into one of the events for training. Him and I became really good friends through that journey, but it allowed us to bounce ideas back. We were in a similar role in individual contributor capacity. And I would go back and say, his name is Kevin. I said, Kevin, what are your thoughts on this? Am I doing this right? What would you do? What's your perspective from all the training that you've got, all the learnings? And we would share ideas back and forth, and we helped each other grow, not necessarily looking for someone who's, maybe 2, 3, 4 levels above us. It was, we're on the same level, but how do we strategically approach this? So to your point, having those conversations with those around you that are doing similar work, it could be instrumental in terms of how you interpret or perceive certain aspects of your job function or your role or your capacity. So that's great advice there.
Absolutely. One of the key influencers for me when I got my first account manager role at Cisco was my SE. Like, we were paired together, but he had probably 20 more years of experience than I did. And I relied upon him really heavily, and he helped me out a lot in that first year.
Absolutely. And that pairing can be so instrumental, right? Because that individual understands the corporate culture, they understand the customers, they understand the policies. And now you're focusing on your one strength that you have to develop and build on until you get the other components coming in as well. And here, you're not really looking out for another mentor or another board of directors. It's just another colleague that can provide a lot of that input to you. So no, great perspectives there, Allison. One of the things I want to touch on, and I know you're a big supporter of this, is work-life balance. It's been a struggle. It's been a challenge for many, and it's seemed to get worse with the amount of information that we're getting at us on a day-to-day basis. And for me as an individual, I had actually hit burnout back in 2014, where I ended up fainting at a customer meeting, and it was so difficult for me to overcome that challenge and that period. And a lot of people didn't understand what mental health and severe anxiety and all that was at that time. So lots of challenges there. We're becoming more and more aware of it. How does Allison tackle work-life balance and anxiety and stress and work-related abilities to disconnect? What does that look like in Allison's world?
Well, I'm sorry you experienced that. That must have been terrifying. And I'm glad that you're willing to share your experience with other people so that they can grow and learn from it. And I hope avoid that, because that seems to be like that moment of passing out is exactly what we're trying to avoid with conversations about work-life balance. Maybe I have the benefit of a longer track record in the industry, and I don't want to give up my age, TJ, but I've been doing this for a long time. So what does that give me? It gives me experience over time to understand what works for me. And it's very individual to each of us as to what works and doesn't work for us. But I like to break it up into a week's time horizon. I find that that's digestible. It's not overwhelming. I can identify key moments over the course of that week that contribute to my well-being. And I can also if it gets out of whack, let's just say I've got to go to Asia for the week, I'm in the wrong time zone, I'm super fatigued, I know I can snap back into my weekly routine when I get home and recover some of that ground that I've lost by traveling. So some of the things, and I'll just share some practical things that have worked for me. I do reserve time on my calendar to exercise. And if I have to give it up because it's the only time that 20 other people can get together on a call and discuss something that's urgent, I will, but I do it really reluctantly. So every day at the end of the day, I block my calendar and I go work out. My workout of choice is yoga. I know we talked a little bit about that, TJ, and it's something that you enjoy too. What I find from that experience is that I get a physical workout and I also have quiet time to unpack my day and really think about some of the things that I've experienced, put them back in the right order and magnitude. And I emerge from that workout refreshed and ready to have a few hours, have dinner with my husband, be more present before I get back on email and tidy things up for the day. The other thing that I do is every Sunday, I have my family over for dinner. My parents are right around 80, and I'm thrilled that they live really close to me. And so we have this moment of connectedness every week that really, I think, ties us all together, makes me feel like I'm staying tight with them, that I know what's happening with them. And it might be the only dinner I make from scratch over the course of the week. Now, I cook a lot, but I put a lot of extra effort into that. I try and make it a moment that matters. There's no phones on the table. Everybody gives each other their undivided attention. My 24-year-old nephew comes over as well. So that's become a moment that really matters to me. It makes me feel grounded through the week that I'm connected to my family. So those are just a couple of the things that I have built into my routine. But again, like everything is so different. Somebody else's moment that matters might be getting together with friends on Thursday to blow off some steam. Like understand and appreciate the way that you feel after that, and whether that gives you energy and makes you feel harmonized and in balance, or if that takes it away and you feel tired the next day and not ready for work. But really looking at my career now, I'm very much a business athlete. I've got to stay focused on sleep. I'm drinking tons of water. I'm eating healthy. I try and maximize my performance on the weekly basis. And in order to do so, I have some really boring weeks, right? Like I'm not the one that you're going to call, it's going to meet you and go to a concert on a Tuesday night. I've got 3 or 4 more days of really heavy work. Another thing that I do that helps me feel in balance is I try and spend a little bit of time on Sunday afternoon preparing and being curious about the week ahead. And I actually get energy from that. People say, oh, you work on a Sunday, like that sounds terrible. Again, totally individual. But for me, it allows me to be curious about what's coming up. Well, I have a podcast with TJ. I want to know more about that. That gets me excited and energized for the week ahead. And so that's been a practice of mine that I started really at ServiceNow that I've continued forward. And I've told my team, hey, if I'm on email, if I'm doing things on Sunday, ignore me. I'm going to text you if I have something that's urgent. But otherwise, just know that I'm getting caught up and I'm getting prepared. And this is just kind of part of my process.
That's a lot. I mean, when I look at all of that, there's one word that I probably encapsulate all of that in, and that's being deliberate. You're very deliberate from what I gather in terms of blocking out your time, making sure you're protecting it for your own well-being. And this is interesting because when I talk to a lot of other leaders and a lot of individuals that I do interview, that deliberation may or may not be there. They're usually, I will work on this when I get free time, or I will do this when there's spare time, or whenever I get to it. But I love how you structure your week at a time and then fit work around all of that, because that's essentially what's happening. And that becomes so critical. And this is something I had to do in the episode that I kind of shared, where I had my moment of, learning by 2x4 and saying, hey, we're not going to do this anymore. I had to structure things out for myself. And that was the first time I actually took up yoga. I never even heard of yoga and never thought about it and thought that's not for me. It's, not the right thing. And I used to go to the gym from time to time, but yoga alone transformed me to an extent that I could never even imagine. It built inner strength more than the outer strength that we focus on. And I think that was the big transformative factor for me. I love the comment or the title that you alluded to, business athlete, though. Tell me more about that. I know you're talking about, you have this structure, you know what you have to do, what you have to go through. Where did that term come from? Where's that originating from? Is that how you see yourself, or do you see that transitioning into anything else in some time? Like, what does that look like? Business athlete, because that's very fascinating.
So it's a good question. It's not my term, and I didn't always think this way. What I thought growing up through my career was I had to outwork everybody, and I had to out hustle everybody to be successful. And it was John again, who I mentioned earlier in the podcast. He gave a talk to us as leaders at ServiceNow, and he said, you need to look at yourself like you see these NBA athletes. And he gave the example of Steph Curry because we were in the Bay Area at the time. He said, you see him performing on the court and you see him doing amazing things. What you don't see is that he spends 2 to 3 hours in the weight room every day, that he spends a half hour stretching, that he monitors what he eats every day, that he has a wellness coach that works on his psychological game, that he's got coaches that work on his shooting game. And then he kept listing more and more things. And he said, but you look at that one thing and you think, oh, he just shows up and does it. But the reality is that as successful leaders in business, we need to build out what it looks like for us to have the same type of routine that produces those amazing outcomes that you see when you're watching that 60 minutes. Is that how long NBA games are? 60 minutes of the NBA game. You have to have the same idea about how you approach your work, right? So he's done an article in Wall Street Journal lately that talks about his morning routine. He works out, he drinks X ounces of water before he starts his day. And he would do that at ServiceNow. He would go work out in the company gym. So again, modeling great behavior, go work out in the company gym, drink his water, talk about the care he had supported himself with, which included seeing therapists, going to therapists as a couple, and how that had impacted and supported him through his life. And so it was, I guess, an adjustment period for me. We're not just going to bottom out working as hard as we can. We have to take care of ourselves. And I think what I learned from it is that as a leader, how you show up is as important as if you show up. So am I showing up in a way that gives people energy, that's inspirational? Am I focused? Am I ready to review their work? And a lot of times I'm reviewing other people's work throughout the day, and they've spent tons of time putting that together. And I want to be fully present. I want to be alert. I want to be refreshed and ready to engage with them. And so I started to look at things that I was doing in my own life and things that I wasn't doing. And so that's when I started picking up my yoga practice. I started doing a lot of other things that I wouldn't have considered before were necessarily key to my success as a leader. And it really changed my thinking on it. So I get that phrase from John Donahoe.
Very cool. Very cool. And I loved how you touched on what you do outside of the court, right? And this is what people forget. They usually come in, hey, I work 9 to 5 and this is all I'm going to do. And I'm disconnected and I'm off entirely. And that's not necessarily true. And you may not be doing the work that is related to what your job is, but there's a lot of planning that goes in it. There's a lot of preparation that goes in it, right? To what you're talking about. And a lot of people neglect that. And then they wonder, why am I not getting anywhere in my career? Or why are things not progressing? Because the person you're competing against is doing all of that work behind the scenes. And when they show up, they're prepared. They show up really well. And they're the ones that are getting promoted and moving along. So I love how you kind of share that analogy there, because it really does provide context. And I'm glad I asked that question about business athlete, because I'm going to use that from now on, because that's essentially what a lot of successful individuals, irrespective of industry or sport or business, do. There's a lot of prep work that goes into everything that they put in before they can become successful. And I remember hearing the phrase that it took 10 years for that overnight success in a startup, right? So there's a lot of emphasis on all the prep that people don't see. They don't see all the behind the scenes. So this is great advice, and I love that you were able to share that with us.
Sure, certainly. I think I was helped along on that, TJ, because right before I started working for John, I had been diagnosed with lupus, which is an autoimmune condition. It causes a whole wide variety of symptoms, but one of them is fatigue. And I was struggling. I was feeling very unwell when I was diagnosed, and it kind of like risen back up a little bit by the time I joined ServiceNow. And so what I was reconciling was not necessarily time management, it was energy management. And so nobody wants to be diagnosed with anything that's, challenging, but there's always some silver lining. And for me, it was getting laser focused on what I wanted to accomplish in life and prioritizing that, which included personal and professional goals. Prioritizing those things and understanding what was more discretionary and might be time that's taking away from those things that I wanted to accomplish. And the combination of those two things, my lupus diagnosis and John consistently sharing his worldview on being more intentional about your preparation, really helped me get focused on what I wanted to accomplish and then pursue that with discipline. Like you said, it takes discipline every week to follow through on that plan.
Wow. Just digging through that even more, one of the things I speak about and talk about is helping people save 2 to 3 to 4 hours a day back. And I give that back through productivity enhancement and some of the skills and teachings that I've gone through, because that's what I had to use in my career. And I remember one of our other conversations where you talked about a challenge not being the amount of time you have in a day, but the amount of energy you have in a day, right? So for you, it's a very different way of dealing with it, whereas everyone else gets 24 hours a day and they may have ups and downs in their energy, but they're usually consistent. In your case, what you're saying is it's not the same. The 24 hours are there, but it's how much energy I can focus and put towards things until I'm completely pooped out and I'm done. So how do you overcome that? How do you plan around that?
So it's kind of the same structure, right? So I started doing that goal setting process, and that was really important. And I had personal goals on there. I have financial goals on savings, nothing that you wouldn't have or any of your listeners wouldn't have. Here's what I want to accomplish in the next year. And then my passion, my hobby is riding horses. So I always have a goal as to what I want to accomplish with my riding, which is fun to sit down and, articulate and put on paper. These all go into this very scientific thing called notes on my iPhone. And that way they're like, if I'm sitting in an airport or waiting on an Uber, I can look really quickly and remind myself over the course of the year. But it's amazing what writing things down, you never have to remind yourself, because you look back and you're like, yeah, that's burned into my memory from doing that exercise. So I started being really intentional about goal setting, and then also recognizing, I think, the moments that were maximum energy. Give you an example, like a conference, go to Las Vegas, you're on in meetings from 7 until 7. Then you go out to dinner lasts till 11. People are wrapping up with their glass of port or whatever. You have to be back on at 7. Those I noticed wiped me out completely. So for that weekend following that, I was completely exhausted. Couldn't do any of the fun things that I like to do with my weekends, and basically just had to rest. Well, realize that's like peak energy. And then what other moments that matter, what impact do they have on my energy? And came up with kind of a system for how to balance those things over time. The big things for me right now, so I don't do as many of the conferences, or as I mentioned earlier, big international travel that creates a deficit that I have to recover from. But I make sure that I'm giving myself the time to do that. So I'm not going to land from, London at 8 o'clock. I know exactly what time the flight lands in Phoenix. Land at 8 o'clock on Friday night and make a plan to meet up with friends that Saturday. I know that whole weekend for me is a recovery weekend. I'm going to, grab some takeout, hang out with my partner, get caught up on email, maybe watch some Netflix, but that's not going to be a highly productive weekend for me. I need to create the space and the time for me to recover so that I'm ready to go back to work on Monday and be my normal energetic self.
Amazing. Again, I think what I captured of all that is really structure and being deliberate again, right? That's essentially what it's coming down to, knowing what your triggers are and what really gets you going and what takes you away from that energy aspect. I mean, that's a lot of us. We talked about having a conversation with friends on a Thursday evening, but if that conversation is going to energize you, yes, great, do more of those. But if it's going to drain you, maybe it's time for, a new set of friends or new conversation topics to really start feeling. And I've had to make those deliberate decisions for myself, because as the family grows, as my objectives change, I need to be aligned with the right type of people that are aligned with what we're trying to accomplish as a family, and the knowledge and skills we're trying to instill in the kids, all of that. So those things definitely tweak and change. So I love you sharing all of that again. And then again, the overall theme of that is just being deliberate about what you do.
Intentional. Yeah. Highly
and
intentional.
then being intentional. Absolutely. And intentional. Absolutely. Absolutely. And Allison, well, thank you very much for all of that. It's time for us to change things up a little bit now.
Okay.
It's time for our rapid fire segment. And the rules are very simple. I'm going to ask a question and just fire away with the first thing that comes to mind. And the first one's usually easy, but let me know if you're ready to go.
Okay, I'm ready. I'm as ready as I'm going to be.
All right. Tea or coffee?
Oh my gosh, coffee. Americanos.
Okay. Americanos. All right. Favorite snack?
Nuts. Mixed nuts.
Okay. Mixed nuts. All right. Is that usually on a flight or anywhere?
No, actually at home too. I just find they give me energy in the afternoon.
Okay, fair enough. The strangest thing you have eaten?
Oh, goodness. I'm not a very adventuresome eater. So probably anything in the seafood variety. That's probably where I get bravest, is seafood. So calamari, that sort of thing. So I know that's super pedestrian, but yeah, that's my answer.
No, that's exactly like me as well. So it's quite interesting.
Oh, you know what else I had? When we were in Japan, I had sea urchin, and I found that wasn't my favorite, but I gave myself credit for trying it. So I'm going to update my answer from calamari to sea urchin.
Okay, perfect. I'll have to dig up on a whole other episode on that one with you at some point. Your go-to activity to unwind after a busy day?
Vinyasa yoga. Yeah.
If you could steal the powers of any superhero, which would it be?
Flight. I don't know why, but since I was a little kid, I've always had dreams that I could fly. So I would love to be able to do that.
Interesting. And if you could teleport anywhere in the world right now, where would you want to go?
London. London is my favorite city in the world. And I go there every year and I feel like I'm just scratching the surface. And I'm only there for 3 or 4 days or something like that. But I just am fascinated by London.
Well, I should have guessed that, and given that you had their flight schedule memorized.
Yeah, no doubt. 2 flights a day.
Yeah. And so if animals could talk, which would you want to have a conversation with?
I would love to have a conversation with my horse, Landis. We have been together for 8 years now. I acquired her 8 years ago, and she's my best buddy. And I do feel like we have kind of a ongoing communication all day. It would be great if she could use words.
That's amazing. So now let me ask you. So with Landis, if Landis could talk in this case, what's the first thing you would ask them?
I would probably ask her whether I think she really likes her job, but I think I'd want to know more about that. Like, what aspects of her work does she like most and least? And I would try and update her schedule to better accommodate the things that she loves. I can tell by her body language that she loves to go horse show. I think she thinks that it's a chance for her to show off, and she's kind of got an alpha personality. But I'd love to just talk to her more about her routine and how to make it optimized for her.
Amazing. Allison, that's a wrap for today's segment. Thank you very much for joining us and sharing your experiences with the world.
Oh, TJ, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Allison, for sharing your valuable insights and experiences with us today. It's been a true pleasure. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to TTalks for more conversations with the leaders who are shaping our world. Until next time, keep on inspiring.